Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, wherever you are in the world. And welcome to this week's edition of the Thursday Talk webinars on DME for Peace. I know many of you are still joining right now, and I'm really excited to have you online. My name is Jack Farrell, and I am the Manager for Partnerships and Strategic Innovation at Search for Common Ground. And I'm based in London, and I'm going to be your host today. Now, COVID-19 has changed our world immeasurably, and we're finally starting to understand the effect that it's having on conflict around the world. And that's why I'm delighted today to welcome Tim Receveur, who is the Director of Programs at the PeaceTech Lab. And Tim is going to lead a discussion on mapping and measuring COVID-19 violence around the world. Just a note, if you have a question during today's presentation, you can write it on the question function on your GoToWebinar dashboard, and we will address it once we reach the discussion. So I'm now going to hand over to today's guest. Tim, you are very welcome to the Thursday Talks, and feel free to take it away when you're ready.
All right, thank you, Jack. I really appreciate your efforts on this, and thanks to Jennifer for inviting me in the first place. Really would love to thank Search for Common Ground for all the thought partnership that you've had with us over the years. Our CEO, Sheldon Himmelfarb, was even part of Search back in the early 90s. And we've been working with Search even all the way up until this year. Last year in Central Asia, especially, we worked with Ganesh and on a violent extremism program across Central Asia last year. So really love what you're doing with the DME, and yeah, thank you again for Search for inviting us. My name is Tim Receveur, and as Jack mentioned, I'm going to be talking about some of the programs that PeaceTech Lab is putting together this year. One of those is the COVID-19 violence tracker that we're working on. The other is called the Road to Equal Justice. These are two of the newest and most timely programs at PeaceTech Lab right now. One is obviously addressing the COVID violence, and then one is addressing racial justice across the US. Oh, try to switch. Oh, there we go, sorry. So the first program I want to tell you about just quickly is the Road to Equal Justice. And we are launching this program in Baltimore next week. The goal is to take this out to 16 cities once we go to Baltimore. For PeaceTech Lab, this is our first major US program and our first major virtual program. We've done virtual programming around the world, and we've done programs in the US before, but this is the first major one in each one of those categories. And the program itself is a series of workshops based on our PeaceTech exchanges that will be looking at how media, data, and technology can accelerate and amplify the fight for racial justice around the US. The goal will be to equip local organizations working on racial justice with these tools. And when we say racial justice, a lot of these issues are economic justice, criminal justice reform, fair housing, education, voting rights, and those types of issues. Our audience for this program are community advocates, grassroots organizations, business leaders, local governments, and in some cases, law enforcement working on these issues. Just quickly on metrics, we PeaceTech Lab on our workshop series, we do a series of pre, post, and 6-month surveys afterwards. Pre-event surveys or types of organizations that are coming, the current tech usage that they have, comfort with tech, what needs they have, and we try to build the actual workshops around the survey data that we're getting in. This is just some survey data right now that we've got coming in for our Road to Equal Justice in Baltimore. Our post surveys include things, is it useful, not useful? What sessions were the most useful? What are you taking back to your organizations? And then, our 6-month survey is how are you still using technology 6 months after the technology that you learned at the workshops? How are you taking that back and applying it to your organization? And then finally, on Road to Equal Justice, we are doing this virtually, which is obviously less in-person interaction, and it is, we can't read the room as easily as we could in an in-person workshop, but we have the ability to capture real-time data and polling on sessions that are going on. So we'll be running this in Baltimore. The virtual workshops will be taking place on October 16th, 23rd, and 30th. We've got another program. This is kind of where we're looking to. Baltimore will be October. We'll evaluate in-depth in Baltimore and launch the second event in January 2021 in Colorado. And then we will be looking at every 6 weeks or so a different city and a different series of workshops in around the country. So I wanted to talk about our COVID violence tracker. So I was talking to Jack right before you joined, and earlier this year in February and March, PeaceTech Lab was looking at, what type of violence is coming out of COVID-19, and we were seeing gender-based violence and domestic violence and misinformation leading to violence. We were seeing misinformation leading to these types of issues, and this was, these are right up the alley of PeaceTech Lab. These are issues that we already look at how to, analyze, to work with partners on the ground to get ahead of these challenges. And so we decided to start cataloging COVID-19 violence around the world. So PeaceTech Lab has a 3-year relationship with a global law firm called Hogan Lovells. And Hogan Lovells offered us volunteers from around the world to capture violence. And we gave them examples of what the violence looks like in different forms. And so they started tracking all these different violence types. A lot of these are based on World Health Organization violence categories. So, they started tracking all these different issues, and they came up with about 2,000 entries from February through the end of May. And we started cataloging these and putting them into the topics. Obviously they align with World Health Organization, but there are some that were unique. But these are the topics that we came up with generally. So racism and xenophobia leading to violence, misinformation, domestic and gender-based violence, resource scarcity, excessive force, these types of issues. And what we were trying to do is we can't depend on volunteers for this kind of activity, and especially when violence is happening in places where we don't have these law firms, where they happen in languages that the lawyers that we have volunteering don't live. So our second phase of our program that we're in now is partnering with Georgia Tech and the Digital 100 in the Netherlands. And the goal is to move beyond our volunteer data and get to a point where we can automate the data that's coming in and map that down to the community level to get ahead of this. And we've been doing this since the end of August, and we've taken those initial 2,000 entries, and we've gotten so far as of last week 20 million media and social media reports worldwide of COVID-related violence. The Digital 100, what they did was they took every type of violence, they took that whole category, took all those articles, and they ran natural language processing on each one of those to build word clouds, to build search queries. This is just a really quick version of what they did, just to show you what that looks like in practice. And what we're doing now is this was all these search queries were put into Brandwatch, and we ran those searches again starting in late August. So we're collecting those now. We're migrating everything over to Google Cloud, and we're getting ready to start pulling that data out for analysis by Georgia Tech, by other organizations. One example is Sky News from the UK reached out to us and asked us about being our media partner on the project, and thinking about how this might look, how we could validate the data that's coming out of this, how they could use it for reporting, how they could use it for some index at Sky News. And we're analyzing this right now of what this relationship could look like with the data that we have coming out of this. Our phase 3, and this is all contingent of phase 2. So we're automating. We're going to be validating that data. So we're trying to turn the Hogan Levels volunteers that we have already into a validation network. So they can't validate every single article coming through. So it would be some kind of representative sample. So they're training the model that we have on BrandWatch to be able to kind of update those search queries over time and get a cleaner set of data that's coming out of that. And then we would be mapping that data down to, you know, it would be mapped globally, but we would select 4 or 5 strategic at-risk countries where, you know, we see violence is likely to occur, and we would map that content down to, you know, the country level to the city level, and you know, these analytics and insights would be kind of the starting points for engagement. So, you know, how this would look in practice, you know, we're thinking about this now, and what we've done already is we've started reaching out to our local networks. You know, we work with thousands of organizations around the world on the challenges that we're seeing with COVID-related violence. So we're messaging them now, you know, trying to get them to be part of this global network to analyze we can pass them the data that's coming out of this. They can get ahead of that. You know, we can provide them with tools and training on, you know, whether it's misinformation, whether it's countering hate speech or gender-based violence. So we can provide them tools and strategies on things that we've already addressed, either in those countries or in other countries. And we would also like to drill down individually into these countries to start mapping other data layers, you know, economics, demographics, quarantine data, health data, to get to the causal, you know, what, you know, we know the violence is happening, but why is it happening, and what are the indicators that we're seeing that, you know, that could prove that, and things we could adjust. So in practice, the first country we would probably be looking at right now is Kenya. We have a partnership with Rongo University in Nairobi. We have some funding from Carnegie, and we are looking to build a research network at the university. So researchers around the country looking at the types of violence that are coming out of this, we would provide them with all the data that we're seeing. They would add additional COVID-related violence data that we're seeing. We can help train the model for Kenya in a better way with that input. They would help us find data layers to add to the map, local data layers that could be useful to get to that causal. And ultimately, you know, we've got PeaceTech Lab has an office in Nairobi, but ultimately we would build these on-the-ground networks, not only of NGOs and civil society, but with public policy experts and government leaders and business to kind of get this out there and get ahead of the violence. So I just want to, I'll pause there and see if you have any questions, but I just wanted to give you an update on a couple of the projects that we're working on. PeaceTech Lab, I know we've presented in the past on our hate speech lexicon work that we've done around the world and identifying hate speech terms in different countries and contexts, and working with local teams to counter those hate speech terms. But I'll pause here and see if you have any questions.
Tim, thank you so much for the presentation. To our audience, this is now your time to shine. You can ask your questions. A couple of notes about our format for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Thursday Talks. You can submit a question in 2 ways. The first is through the question function on your GoToWebinar dashboard, which will allow you to type your question. The second is to click on the hand icon to raise your hand, which will allow us to unmute your microphone so you can ask your question live. When you do submit your question, we ask that you submit your name and affiliation. And just a note, these talks are recorded and posted on Team for Peace. So those who are not able to join us at this time can go back and listen to the presentation and the discussion. Now, Tim, this is fascinating. And as someone who is sort of working on COVID response programming, COVID response platforms around the world, this is an amazing piece of work. But I know that, you know, for example, just looking at the map today, it can be quite overwhelming for a number of people on the call who are wondering to how they can interact with the data. And I was wondering if you could give some advice to sort of participants in today's webinar about how they can sort of interact with the platform, as well as maybe contribute information or benefit from utilizing the platform.
Yeah, so we I don't even know if I mentioned that early on, but we've launched a platform called COVID-19violence.org, and all the data was mapped on that platform back in this is back in June. So the way we did it, we took all that volunteer data. We work with a company called Visonomy in Washington D.C., and they mapped all that data down to down to the city level in most cases. And what we did was that's more of that website is more of a snapshot in time. So everything is mainly through June 1st, and we took all of that volunteer data, and now we are moving forward with this automation, but none of that automated data is on the map right now. So what we're trying to do is right now is Jack and I were having a conversation about this before everybody joined, but trying to make sense of, it's so much data that's coming in. We're going from 2,000 entries, which is on a map is really noisy, and trying to go from that to 4 million or 20 million entries, it's even crazier. So right now we're really spending a lot of time on what does that UI UX look like? What can we do with on Google Cloud for dashboarding this out and trend lines, and when we start adding additional layers to this. So we have the COVID related violence, that's a lot just by itself, but how do we when we start adding health data and economic data, how does that look, and how does it become intuitive for the end user? And so that's kind of what we're evaluating right now and trying to figure out that next step of how to, is a map the right approach to this, or is it some other format? So sorry, that in a long-winded way, that's kind of where we are now in the thinking. We've got a lot of data, and for instance, with Kenya, we're going to start trying to pull all of our data from Google Cloud into some exportable format and get that out to Rongo right away to show them what's out there, and they can start working on analyzing that. The same with Georgia Tech, the same with Sky News, just to kind of take that, and then we can start. Obviously, the ultimate goal is to kind of get cleaner data as well. So we're working on the validation process. We're working on updating these search queries to get the cleanest, most accurate data coming out of this.
So Tim, the first question from the audience comes from Lindsay North, who writes, "This is so interesting. Thank you for sharing. Have you included, or is there a plan to include, local publications that do not have an online presence? Do sources include a variety of languages and alphabets?"
Yeah. So yes on the first one. On the language issue, that was a big issue because a lot of our volunteers, their first language is English, and so we've obviously got a bias towards the English language in the initial search query and the automation. So we're going to be in the first series of countries. It's going to be countries that English is a language there. So US, UK, Kenya, Nigeria, India, and at the same time we're working with we were talking with a group called Umdena last week, which they would take that initial English query in India, for instance, and they would start adding to it in the Hindi language sources, or Swahili in Kenya, or Hausa in Nigeria. So that's something we're looking at now is how to add in those additional languages to make it more representative in these initial countries, but then to be able to expand it out to other countries going forward.
Great, thank you, Tim, and great to see you working with Umdena, who did a wonderful Thursday talk a few weeks ago on artificial intelligence for peace building. Our next question is going to come live from our audience, and it's going to come from my colleague Hilda de Man. Hilda is our COVID-19 response program manager at Search, and you are muted, Hilda.
And now I'm unmuted, correct?
Yes. Correct.
Hi. Thanks. Thanks. First of all, thanks, Jack, for organizing it, and Tim, super interesting presentation. It always has to be super short on these DME for Peace talks, but it's been super informative. And just to already state, I'd love to have a separate conversation with you where we can go a little bit more in depth, because as Jack mentions, I'm managing this large COVID response program for research, and so we really want to just use the data that's available to do better programming. And I feel a lot of the data that you guys are gathering could be super useful, because a lot of the countries are actually really overlapping, Kenya being one of them. But before going into that, I just had a very basic question just to make sure I understand well. The incidents that you're tracking, it's kind of when the violence has already happened, right? So I'm trying to understand, like, is there any way that this can have like a predictive value? Like, is there something around also registering tensions that may lead to violence? Because that could also, from a programming perspective, be very interesting, right? So I'm trying to assess is it really already at the violent incident level, or could it be something like tensions boiling up that we foresee could lead to violent incidents? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Hilda. That's a great question. On the predictive analytics, we include like a phase 4 that's predictive analytics. But right now, that's mainly just pie in the sky. We're talking with Georgia Tech about what that actually looks like in practice. We've got another somebody that used to work with DARPA that is helping us think through that as well. So it's something that we plug it in. I'm not a data scientist, so I didn't want to put that in there, and you know, it's something out of my wheelhouse and something that would be further down the road for the project, but something we are definitely thinking about. For the tensions, you know, that's something that PeaceTech Lab has done before and looked at, you know, how things are boiling up in a community. And that's kind of where we start adding these local partners, like Rongo is thinking about what those networks look like, where we can incorporate those metrics and start to see that at the same time. But right now, that's you know, it's in the thought process as well. But we're further along because we've got a contract with Rongo and starting to think through this with their research staff.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Hilda, for your question. We have another raised hand in the audience. It's time from Gregory Connor of UNDP. And Gregory, if you want to go ahead and ask your question live, please feel free to do so.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Tim, for the very insightful presentation. I'm wondering for trend analysis, if it's possible to compare some pre-COVID statistics on violence to the data that you have captured. Maybe there's a proxy that you've identified that would allow users to measure changes in levels of violence. And if not, I'm wondering if the new iteration of the platform that you've just discussed follows the same methodology from the time the law firm and its volunteers were engaged to the new version that includes additional languages and such, so that we could start to perhaps register changes in levels of violence from the start of the pandemic to now and then beyond. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's something we're looking at right now, is the kind of the statistics in these categories and what data we have before all this happened. And you know, for instance, we're working with Georgetown University right now to look at gender-based violence statistics, like pre and post COVID, and seeing kind of how that relates. The challenge we have is, you know, statistics are in, you know, there are some that are global that we could plug in very easily. But some of the things that we want to look at, they are, you know, they're at the country level at least. And we would be looking, you know, that's something we're putting together now, but you know, that would requires a lot of effort to get those statistics, to map those out and to put those on. And that's something that we're looking at with our partners at Rongo in Kenya right now, is what do those metrics look like, and what can we go back and look at in the past. For Hogan Lovells, for the methodology, I'm going to be talking with them actually in about an hour, looking at how that looks, if they can help us in other countries, you know, say Brazil. That's one of the topics that's going to come up, and can we collect this in Portuguese? Can we go back and look at the same, you know, the time scale that we have for the initial collection, and then trying to get them involved in the validation of our data that's been automated now.
Thank you for asking your question live, Gregory. Our next question, our written comment and question comes from Robert Zal. And Robert writes, very interesting, Tim, thanks for sharing. What is the timeline for this rollout? Since COVID may not be with us forever, fingers crossed, or do you see this as an instrument for reporting on other types of violence as well?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Robert. And thanks to Robert, we got the group that's mainly putting the back end of this is a group called the Digital 100, and our partners at PeaceTech Lab Netherlands. So really appreciate Robert helping on all this. Right now, we are looking at our engine, our initial rollout. We're now in early October, but by the end of December to have some dashboarding, the mapping, the initial part of this out to people that would be updated in a real-time fashion. And then we would be looking through 2021 to be rolling these out. Kenya is going to be starting, earlier than the rest, but rolling out this project in other countries on a regular basis in 2021. So that's kind of where we are with the rollout. It's a lot of this has been done pro bono so far. So we're now fundraising and trying to get funds to make this more regular as far as the staffing goes. Yeah, that's if that helps. That's kind of where we're looking at this right now.
Great, thank you guys. We have a number of questions, a number of points from Christina Will. Apologies if I'm butchering anybody's name, on her work at Insecurity Insight. And Christina, I'm going to unmute your microphone so that you can sort of make your comments live. So you're self-muted, so please feel free to unmute and ask Tim your question. Hey, Christina, I can see your microphone is live. You're having a perfect streak of working microphones from the audience. So unfortunately, it seems that while Christina's microphone is live, we cannot hear her. So Christina, please feel free to type away in the questions box on your GoToWebinar dashboard, and I will do my best to translate and to sort of offer sort of your thoughts to Tim and our audience. So just a reminder to our audience that you can ask questions in two ways. The first is through the question dashboard, where many of you are typing questions as I speak, but the other is to raise your hand, and we will try to unmute your microphone. And if it doesn't work, well, there's no harm in trying. So Tim, one of the sort of questions I asked you beforehand was sort of what inspired, what triggered sort of the launch of the COVID-19 tracker within PeaceTech Lab? Like, also you mentioned that you're doing this pro bono, so there was no funding tied behind it. And we all know that working in the NGO community, trying to make time for these sort of ad hoc sort of voluntary projects is really difficult. So what triggered that response within sort of the PeaceTech Lab and your team?
Yeah, well, part of it is a lot of our, to be honest, a lot of our projects were put on hold because of COVID. So a lot of our projects are in person. So those were stopped, and we were looking, obviously COVID is the, we're looking at this in February and March, and we're just seeing that become a huge international issue. And as I mentioned, it's something that the issues that we were seeing coming out of COVID aligned very well with the PeaceTech Lab, our mission, and then the organizations we've been working with, and the types of violence that have been coming out of COVID. So, the xenophobia and racism aligns very well with our hate speech work. We've done our PeaceTech exchanges, our workshop series on misinformation and gender-based violence in the past. So it's, a lot of these, we have networks already set up to deal with these issues. We've already had strategies to address these. We have lexicons to get ahead of them in different countries, so that's kind of where we we started, and then we were looking at, we've got this Hogan Lovells volunteer network of thousands of lawyers around the world that want to help us with this. So this could be a good place to start and ask them to collect this. And then our CEO, Sheldon Himmelfarb, has, he has deep connections everywhere. So he has a connection to the CEO of Mapbox. And so, if we can collect this, then maybe we can ask Mapbox to help us map this. He's got, Robert just asked a question earlier, but, like the Digital 100 is working on similar issues. Can we talk with them about working on the project? And so it became organic. We mentioned this to Georgia Tech. They like the idea. We mentioned this to Google, and they really jumped on it as well and provided us with Google Cloud credits for this. So it's been kind of a word of mouth for us, and obviously it's a huge international issue. It'll be with us for some time, but yeah, we've just been looking at this, and Robert mentioned it earlier, but it's a COVID violence tracker now, but it could be an engine to track all types of violence, with just a simple tweak of the search query that's coming in. So anyway, it's a good first step for us, and we had a lot of free time sitting by not going out to the field and working on our normal programming. So that's kind of the origin story.
It's absolutely fascinating, Tim, and obviously this has been sort of months in the making. So I was wondering, do you have any insights that you'd like to share, or the insights that the data has shared regarding sort of the effect of COVID-19 on conflict?
Yeah, I mean,
it doesn't have to be a global trend, but like maybe on a country level, like have we seen specific relationships?
Yeah, so some of the things that we've seen, especially early on in Nigeria and Kenya, we were seeing deaths from the quarantine, the police enforcing the quarantine, excessive use of force, killing far more people than COVID was killing in those communities. So that was one that we were seeing early on. We were seeing a trend of, before it started showing up in the news, attacks on medical workers around the world. So anywhere from, Brazil to Iraq, that people were blaming medical workers and targeting them in attacks. Those were a couple of the early insights that we saw out of this. We haven't looked at anything since. We've been looking at it, but it's we're going to have a huge 20 million cases or something in that realm coming out in the next few weeks. So we'll have a lot more to analyze at that point.
Our next question is from Christina, who's been able to type, which she tried to share over her microphone. And Christina writes, my main question is whether the data is also coded by the target of the violence. I'm specifically interested to know whether or not the data allows us to see whether the violence targeted health facilities or health workers or someone or something else in society.
Right now, that's not something that we've included in the tracking of this. So I'm sorry about that. We talked to a group called MITRE a few weeks ago, and they had that issue as well. They would like to see that target and have that included. And their big thing was healthcare workers being targeted as well.
Yeah, so I know Christina has some similarities and sort of synergies in your guys' work. So Christina, I'd encourage you to reach out to Tim after today's webinar. Tim, I don't know if you have a slide with your contact information that might be sort of worth sharing, or we can put it in the chat function if you're happy to share email with today's attendees.
Sure, I don't think I do. My email address is tim, T-I-M, at PeaceTechLab.org.
Nice and simple. And
feel free to reach out with any questions at all on this, or Hilda mentioned talking about partnering on places like Kenya, and we'd be open to anything like that at all in this project.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of huge opportunities. I know that I'm seeing so many familiar names and faces on today's call that I know there's a ton of work being done in COVID response programming. And I think one of the challenges that we have is trying to coordinate and effectively, build on each other's work as opposed to duplicating it and placing undue duress on the communities within which we work. Yeah, so this is a final call for questions from today's audience. You have an expert in Tim at your disposal. Please feel free to make the most of it by raising your hand or typing your question. I'll give that 30 more seconds before I wrap up. But Tim, thank you so much for sharing the work of the PeaceTech Lab and the work the PeaceTech Lab is doing in response to COVID-19. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought. I think we had a conversation before about sort of how maps are being utilized, and I think what you guys are building through the COVID-19 violence tracker is a tool that everybody in our field, not just our field, not just the peace building field, but in development, humanitarian, in public health context, should be able to benefit from. And I think it's an incredible piece of work that is only sort of going to sort of get more and more sort of refined as you guys sort of continue to work on it and continue to sort of enhance your resources and enhance your data sources. So I'm really excited to see, you know, where we are in 12 months time with this tracker and how people are utilizing it. Maybe we can have you back on for a follow-up discussion to discuss more insights and discuss how this tracker has developed over time.
Yeah, well, thank you again, Jack, for your time, and thanks to everybody for joining this. And we'd love to come back in a few months and show you where we are.
Great, and with that, we're just about finished for today. Thank you again, Tim, for sharing, and thank you to the team at the PeaceTech Lab for developing such an innovative tool. And thank you to our audience for joining today's webinar. This recording is going to be posted online on our media gallery later today. So if there are things that you weren't quite sure about, or if there are things you think you misheard, please feel free to return to it and share it with your colleagues. We have a comment section on DME for Peace under every resource. Continue the discussion in the comments. We are a community built on learning. We're going to be back next week with Theo Dolan, who is a technical advisor at FHI 360. And Theo's joining us to talk about a local sort of organization's guide to countering violent extremism. So it should be a fascinating discussion, not so much on the tech focus that we've had recently, but really sort of looking at sort of how to sort of have locally led processes when working on CVE programming. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Tim. A reminder to look out for each other, to take care, to stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you all online again in the not too distant future.